Hi, I am Ajoy Poddar.
Hi, I'm Tanushree Poddar, and today we are going to read a story from our new book, More Spooky Stories. The story is known as The One Night at Abbot Mount.
Not far from Champavat, a small town in the foothills of the Himalayas in Uttarakhand, was a lovely place on top of a hill surrounded by thick forests. The most beautiful thing about the place was its magnificent view of the snow capped peaks of the Himalayas. It wasn't surprising that the idyllic place became a place of choice for British officers during the Raj. Soon, the small town began flaunting luxurious buildings and resembled an English village. An English businessman called John Harold Abbott had discovered the potential of this place. An avid hiker, Abbott had been on one of his hiking trips when he had stumbled upon this little piece of heaven. Excited with his find, he had constructed a bungalow at the highest point on the hill. The year was 1914 and constructed a bungalow at the highest point on the hill. The year was 1914 and the idyllic bungalow was literally in the middle of nowhere. There were but a few scattered huts with local residents who survived by cultivating the small patches of flat land and hunting in the surrounding forests. The place came to be known as Abbot Mount.
Word about the place soon spread. It was his love for hunting that drew Smith to Abbot Mount. He was a daring hunter and a friend of Jim Corbett. The abundance of wildlife was tempting enough for him to construct a bungalow, and it was an exciting life for the hunter who had accompanied Corbett on several hunting expeditions during which they had had narrow escapes. Smith never ceased to boast about his escapades at the slightest opportunity. It was in 1917 that Smith finally retired and moved to his bungalow in Mount Abbott with his wife Elaine and two sons. By then, a few Englishmen who had heard about the place bought land around Abbott's property and constructed a couple of bungalows. These remained unoccupied, with owners planning to settle there in the future. The only time they occupied the bungalows was during the summers, when the heat and the dust of the plains drove the British to the hills.
Winters in the Himalayan town was harsh and living at Abbot Mount offered a challenge. During the summer, big game was available in plenty for the handful of British residents who came to live in the area. The locals, who had lived in fear of wild beasts, depended on the white men for their safety. The villagers were quite used to smaller animals. It was the leopards and tigers which killed their cattle that worried them. Their anxiety mounted whenever a man-eater was spotted prowling around the place. The villagers avoided moving out of their houses during the evenings. Smith was good with his gun, and so the villagers sought his service whenever they spotted a leopard or a tiger. The arrangement suited a man like Smith, who took pride in tracking down the beasts. The Smith's bungalow, with its sloping tiled roof, had 4 bedrooms with a spacious veranda running all around it. The doors were double layered and sturdy in order to provide protection from the wild animals that could be heard walking around the garden in the dead of night. The Smith boys, Timothy and Thomas, aged 10 and 12 respectively, loved the hills as did their parents. Save for the occasional danger of wild beasts, life was tranquil and satisfying.
In the summer of 1917, Captain Williams, who was recuperating after being wounded in the First World War, decided to spend some time with the Smiths. He was on sick leave, and the doctors had advised him to spend a few weeks in the invigorating air of the hills. The two men had attended the same school in England and were good friends. The Smiths were a hospitable family, and their bungalow had ample room for friends. They welcomed the opportunity to swap stories of war and the good times in England. Timothy and Thomas were excited when they heard the Williams were coming to spend a few weeks at Abbot Mount. A couple of years ago, the two boys had spent some time with Captain Williams' family and got along famously with their son, Frank, who was 11. There was much excitement when the two families got together.
The boys were always outdoors during the day. They played cricket in the open grounds with the local boys, climbed trees, and explored the area. The house was located at the edge of the jungle, and the boys were warned not to stray too far from the house. Smith issued instructions to everybody about the precautions to be taken. It was mandatory to remain indoors after sunset, and the two families spent the evening by playing cards, chess, or listening to stories narrated by the two men. Frank was fascinated by Smith's hunting exploits. He wanted to be a hunter like Jim Corbett and Smith, while Timothy wanted to go to war like Captain Williams. The boys, like most boys of their age, loved bragging. The Smith brothers boasted of having seen several snakes and wild animals. Carried away by their bravado, Frank declared he was not afraid of tigers and he would kill man-eaters when he grew up. "I don't believe you," Timothy challenged Frank. Even brave men are afraid of man-eaters."
"It's the truth. I'm not afraid of tigers," Frank said, refusing to back down. He wanted to impress the others with his boldness. "We'll know soon enough," said Timothy. He was fed up with the chap's bragging. The brothers decided to teach a lesson to Frank by playing a prank on him. It was a cold January night when the brothers decided to carry out their plan. Timothy and Frank were playing chess while their parents were chatting and enjoying post-dinner drinks in the drawing room. Unseen by the others, Thomas crept out of the house with a box containing a tape recorder and amplifier. It was a tape recorder on which Smith had recorded the sound of a tiger's roars. Although a beat of villagers was the preferred method to draw out a tiger or other wild animals, Smith often used the tape recorder for luring the wild beast out of its hideout. Suddenly, there was a sound of shuffling in the shrubs outside. It was accompanied by the sound of a tiger's growling. Realizing that Thomas had put the plan to action, Timothy suppressed a smile and watched Frank's reaction. The boy had paled on hearing the tiger's growls. He looked very frightened indeed.
But the boys were not the only ones who heard the tiger's growl. The adults had heard it too. Shh! Quiet! Smith whispered as he cocked his ears. There was pin-drop silence in the room. A couple of moments later, they heard it again. This time it was clearer. Tension enveloped the room. What's it? Alina Smith stood up, spilling the coffee. Check the doors and windows, Alina. Smith got up and ran to fetch his gun. And fetch a torch, he instructed. I think the man-eater is on the prowl. It is in the gardens, said Williams. It sounded close by. Don't worry, I'll get it tonight. By then, Frank was shivering with fright. Timothy smiled. The loudmouth would never dare to brag again. You can't go alone. I'll come with you, offered Captain Smith as he emerged from the bedroom with his gun. No, I don't want you to limp around, offering yourself as a meal to the bloodthirsty beast. Smith said and took the torch from Alina. Just stay here and remain quiet, he said in a low voice. I'll be back in a jiffy.
There was a tangible feeling of terror in the room. Captain Williams stood rooted to the spot, wringing his hands helplessly. He had faced guns and enemies in war, but man-eating tigers were an entirely different matter. He had no expertise in hunting the wild beasts. Violet Williams held tight to her husband's hand, preventing him from going out with Smith. She began praying softly. Timothy watched in satisfaction as Frank curled up on the sofa, his hands clutching at the cushions for support. The prank was working wonderfully. Timothy was in two minds as he watched his father walking towards the door with a gun in his hand. He was enjoying Frank's distress and did not want the trick to end so soon. But he had to stop his father from stepping out of the house. His father would shoot, and Thomas, who was outside, would be shot. Don't go out, Dad. There is no man-eater. It's a joke. It could be Thomas playing the tape recorder, he stammered. He was afraid of his father's wild temper, but he was more afraid of the danger that his brother faced.
What? Bloody hell! What are you saying? And enraged Smith began to shake his younger son. That's not the tape recorder. That's a real tiger. Where is Thomas? He shouted. He's out there playing the tape. Get the hell out of my way. Smith pushed Timothy out of the way and rushed out. He was just in time to see the tiger leaping into the bushes and disappearing. He fired 2 quick shots. The sound echoed in the surrounding hills, and then there was silence. The dying echo of the gunshots roused the villagers. With lit mashals, they emerged cautiously from their huts and gathered at the Smith bungalow. Amazed, they watched the Smith hunting for his son in a crazed manner. The tape recorder and the amplifier lay under a tree, but Thomas was nowhere to be found.